So welcome everyone to the first inaugural lecture of 2014-2015 Ryerson lecture series. Tonight we have two speakers from Copenhagen, both from the renowned Danish firm Henning, Larsen Arkitekter. Henning Larsen is a global practice with Scandinavian roots. They're an international firm with 229 people and offices in Copenhagen, Oslo, the Faroe Islands, Munich, Istanbul, and Riyadh, in addition to the new office in Hong Kong. They're recognized for their focus on people, daylight, and space. Dorte Mandrup is a design principal and partner in the firm who has design responsibility for the conceptual framework of every project in the studio. Her work has won numerous awards and recognition. She's also actively engaged in the architectural academic community as a lecturer and teacher and juror of competitions. She was on the jury, she just informed me of our RAIC awards this past winter in Ottawa. The title of her talk tonight is Public Work. And Becker is a principal and managing partner at Henning Larsen and an adjunct professor at the Department of Architecture and Design at Aalborg University. In 2001, he was awarded the Eckersberg Medal by the Danish Royal Academy of Fine Arts as a special recognition of his extraordinary contribution in putting Danish architecture on the world map. His talk is People, Space, and Daylight. And they are both speaking here courtesy of the Danish Embassy. So please welcome our speakers.
Thank you for the invitation to come here today. Coming from Scandinavia to Canada is quite interesting. There's a lot of things that we share somehow, and I think we could learn a lot from you, and hopefully you can get inspired a little bit about what we are doing in Denmark. I will take you through kind of why we're doing what we do, and then three different projects, very different kind of typologies: education, museum, and performing art. But it should be quick, half an hour, at least you get an overview. So for us, Arkitekter is about staging human interaction. This is super important because it's a kind of let's say a base assumption when we do our designs, and it means that everything we do is kind of meant to be used for people, and people we put into spaces like this. Is this in the National Opera in Copenhagen? This is the Foyer Space. For us, this is the most important of the opera. It's the informal place where people meet each other. As architects, we use space, of course. You do also that in your studies, and all architects you do that. But space gets informed by daylight, and daylight for us is a kind of also a key in our design work. I think the reason why is that daylight in Scandinavia is such a scarce resource. We have very long winters. We have very cold winters. You had one last year here. We have a very nice summers. But the way we treat daylight is about getting most out of it. This is from the City Library in Malmö, Sweden. We did in late 90s. Daylight is not just about light over a day, it's also how the light changes over a season. And this is the same project where this is the summer situation, everything is kind of colored green and warm, and then in the winter situation it's very kind of white and crisp and clear. Anyway, that gives like a very big change over a season. Looking at a one day, we have a warm southern light coming in at midday. This is the Glyptotek in Copenhagen we did some years ago. And then a cold northern light, just a new headquarters for a pharmaceutical company opening last month. We are an office, and you might not know that. We started in '59. The old, now deceased Professor Larsen started the office at that time. And from the beginning, the office has been working internationally. and had very much an eager to come out and be working in different cultures. Now we've grown very much. When I started in '89, we were 23 people in the office, and now we're 270 with 7 offices. We are not like a Gensler or one of these very big companies. We are opening these offices because we have projects in different places, and we need to be close to the client to be able to deliver this co-creational process that everybody's asking for today. This is a picture from our office in Copenhagen. We have kind of 4 majors when we work, and we're not doing everything because you can't be good at whatever you want to, but we can kind of hold these 4 fields in architecture. And this cultural spaces from particularly performing arts places. This is the National Opera in Copenhagen from the outside. You saw inside before. This is a concert hall and conference center in Sweden. We did in the center of a city some years ago. Learning spaces. We're doing a lot of university work, and it's interesting because there's this kind of aim to create spaces where you develop people in. And you could ask yourself, can architecture kind of support that? We believe so very strongly. And this is from Plymouth University in southwest England, and this is University in Reykjavik, Iceland. Then we do workspaces. Actually, we do headquarters, which is quite the same, but maybe very good because it's for the end user, it's for client. And we were invited for a competition for this project some years ago, and we had really not a clue of how to do a headquarter. And there was a long discussion in the design team how to kind of approach this. And we ended up saying, well, okay, it must be a similar situation as with the educational spaces. It must be about creating a platform for innovation and people kind of discussing and developing stuff together. And we used that recipe, and I must say ever since we have been winning a lot of headquarters with the same very simple strategy that workplace is not a kind of a workplace as such, it's a place where people develop. And then we do planning. We do some very big scale planning projects, different places in the world. But here it's from Norway, where we're doing a neighborhood center, small place, and then we're doing some social housing in the northern part of Denmark, where it's about to take the whole area into consideration. We work a lot with sustainability. We started this 8 years ago in the office, and now it's a separate department. We focus on daylight and energy, because for us it was difficult to take the whole package of sustainability in, and it means that we are using daylight the artistic way in kind of one sense, and then with the more kind of technical and research-based approach on the other hand. And with daylight we have a strong tool to do a lot. The reason why we're doing energy, and I don't know if it's so important here because you have so much oil, but in Denmark we don't have that much, and energy is terribly expensive. So saving energy is really saving running cost, and you can kind of add that to capital cost for a project. This is a diagram I did for a contractor in Holland. They were asking for 16 floors, 14,000 square meters approximately, with workspaces in the perimeter of the platform, 30 by 30 meters. And quite simple, by looking into our research, we could see that we could, by utilizing the whole platform, and that means you can have workspace all over, we could reduce the number of square meters by having 1 meter more floor to ceiling. And this all comes out of a rule that is more and more being executed all around in Europe, that says you need, at the moment, 2% daylight, but coming in the new rules, 3% daylight on a permanent workspace. And that means at any time of the day, the daylight that's represented outside needs to have 3% of that inside on your workspace. If you can't prove that, it cannot be a permanent workspace. I know for people working in cubicles and stuff like that, this is not good news, but it's a reality in Europe. And it means that for a lot of organizations, universities, or pension funds owning this kind of buildings, you can have buildings that are totally outdated. They cannot be used. They're not efficient anymore because they cannot provide the 3% daylight as they should do within the next year. 2015, these rules will be implemented, and I'm sure it will also come to this continent. We have a kind of a work method in how we do stuff, and the reason why we have done that is that we have to be able to communicate with clients, users in these processes when we work together, but also because we have so many people sitting in different positions around the world, so this is important. If you look at it, it's terribly banal, and it should be like that. We have a data collection, analytic exercise, and then we put in what we call a strategic concept. If I was today to do a competition for a university building in Europe, I would get a layer of so many pages in binders talking about what these buildings should do or this building should do. If I carefully read all of that, it shows very precise that you cannot build anything after that because it's counterproductive. It goes in all directions. And that's because you have so many user groups, you have management, you have facility management, and they all have a saying, but nobody can kind of go in and make these prioritized choices in that material. So that is what we do here, is that we're saying, okay, let's boil it down to one page, or let's say 5 paragraphs, and that they should kind of represent what this is all about. And if it's not a competition, and often it is competitions because 85% of our jobs come through winning competitions in our firm. But if we are with a client, we present that to the client and says, you came with all these binders, but in reality, this is the 5 most important issues to be solved with this design. And then we do 2 or 3 architectural concepts, because we say there's not just one solution to a problem or to a challenge. And by doing these different solutions architecturally, we kind of, let's say, have a much more informed decision of where to go, because it's never black and white. It always ends up that something happens in one concept that was good and we have to look at that again, stuff like that. But in a way, it's a transparent and inclusive process if you're a client or an end user. But also for our teams when we do design, this is something that's very simple to discuss. So when I call our Hong Kong office, for instance, and I ask, what is strategic concept for that project? Is that something, celebration?
That's a strategic concept.
Then it's strategic. Then they can say exactly what the project is about, and then you can discuss much better with the team. Yeah. Now to the projects. This is a university building we opened yesterday in Denmark, and it is a faculty for economics, for studies in economics, placed in the southern part of Denmark. The strategy here has been to make a building where you come as a student, the first day when you enter your institution, and you get a view over the whole kind of let's say offer. What is the offer they can give me? What can I do here? So by coming in one place and then have a kind of a revolving or turning kind of atrium, we open up clearly. So you come in here. This is just a couple of months ago. Come up and you kind of follow up all the way to the daylight. So there's kind of a progression as you come up. And this is all informal study places. We very much divide our kind of spatial organization between the formal learning and informal learning. There's 3 steps in learning. One is to go to a lecture hall, then you go out, you try to discuss with your fellow students what you saw, and then the third is kind of level, or what you say, step 3 is kind of the possibility to activate it, to go back and explain what was happening. And we are deliberately very much creating these informal spaces, because in a brief you always get the formal spaces but never the informal spaces, and we have to kind of fight for these square meters and such. So we have this kind of space, you know, this very, you sit here today, this is a formal, with maybe not learning, you can say entertainment also, but if it will be then the kind of learning. And when you walk out there, you will start maybe discuss something. You need to have a place to sit, kind of an area to be, and this is important. So coming out of the lecture hall, you can come to this kind of places where more intimate spaces that kind of interlinks with the bigger space, which interlinks with the very big space going all the way to the main entrance. We have the enclosed space with study rooms with curtains that can be drawn. We have like these very traditional ones along the facade, which is like, you see them anywhere. But again, you look out, you become part of the city in a way. You're part of something bigger, even though you sit focused and concentrated on your work. But this idea of having the faculty as kind of one big space with small kind of subdivided space inside is kind of important to ensure the possibility for the students to make these choices. And I'm not saying that you should go to a class that is in function and then knock on the door, say, I want to get in here, or like, I want to participate. But just having the idea that something is happening and you could go there is kind of psychologically very much important. You see how you can look down like this connection. We are also creating outdoor spaces. Climate change have been good to Denmark, at least for the summer. We have longer summers than we had before, and people really enjoy to get out. You know, it's like you need, in the wintertime you also need to get out to get some daylight, basically. Then the facade. This is a very sustainable building. We are using approximately 30 kilowatts per square meter per year here, which is a very low energy building. And the facade is the solar protection here is a system of louvers that can open and shut, and they will do that automatically. So the building kind of changes as the sun turns. So as soon as the sun is away from a facade, it opens up again totally, and then it closes down and opens again. And then you can of course oversteer that, get this kind of motif. So this picture is a little bit false because I think it's made for the photographer. So they shot some off and had some open to make this pretty picture. In reality, the facade will be more or less closed in one direction if the sun is on. Another project is in culture, very different scale also. 16,000 square meters, what is that? 160,000 square feet. Situated on a green field outside the provincial city of Aarhus. It's for archaeological findings in the ground. So in the competition, we worked with the idea that you just kind of open the lid to the excavations down there. And it was a very simple scheme, and I think that you will like this simplicity to it. It's all attached to a very big mansion, a farmhouse, or farm in this area, which is also a museum. And this is on top of a hill. So you overlook the sea, the Baltic Sea, leading to Copenhagen. Inside, it's all about how you will be slowly moved into the earth, into the excavations. So we're using a lot of daylight up. As we go further and further down, it gets darker and darker and more focused. And you know, with museums, it's also to work with a kind of black box strategy. Many of them want to have total control. The museum people want to have total control over the light. So it is a way of having something in the foyer space up, and then you come down. So this, we're seeing the same space just from the other side. And in here, you see very little daylight coming in. There's a little thing coming in this way, but basically you can cut the whole thing off. But the opening that you can, as soon as you get out of the exhibition, you can look out and you can see the sky, you get the light to come in. It's quite important. What also happens with this project is that you can inhabit the roof. You can use it even though you haven't bought a ticket. And this is also a key thing for us in the cultural buildings. That there's the people that are kind of bought tickets, they want to go for the formal stuff, and there's people that kind of comes just to enjoy the life around it, or maybe use it in a different way. Just an evening situation, this idea that this warm light opens up in late afternoon in a winter day, and it's like looking into the center of the earth, symbolically, of course. What we saw very early, this is taken just when we finalized the grass on the roof, and it's been growing there for a little, kind of like a month, was people was using it for picnic, and kids was playing around. And it is quite nice, because when you come up to the top of the building, you get this total view. So there's a dialogue going on between the guests inside, the visitors to the museum, and the public outside, which we didn't see. We didn't have kind of seen as a possibility. And then after a couple of weeks, somebody arranged a cycling race on top, and unfortunately it took a lot of the grass off. You cannot see that, but we had really difficulties after with that. But this is another thing we started looking at in May this year in the office, that a lot of our buildings, they are used in many different ways that we never saw possible when we did the design. And the beautiful thing about social media is that it's published now, and it adds a dimension to the buildings that we are really happy about, that you can trace a way of imagination which is far beyond what I would say, not boring architects, but like architects that have kind of maybe a more formal approach to it could imagine. And this is the museum. You see the farm, the big farm. The last project, and let's say maybe the most known of what we have done for a long time, is this harbor, the concert hall, conference center in Reykjavik, Iceland. This picture symbolizes also the situation the building or the project was undergoing. We started this project in 2005. We had just finalized the detailing and started building in Iceland when the whole economy just melted down. It was a PPP project. The bank and the contractor went bankrupt within 3 months after we started, and we had already set up an office in Iceland to facilitate the whole construction. And then with the help of IMF loans and governmental support in Iceland, we could build it slowly, but it took a couple of years more than planned. So, and during the crisis, the building became for some a symbol of that Iceland will survive this, and for others that this is another kind of heavy rock dragging us into the sea, because financially we are totally incapable as such. This is the situation. This is Reykjavik. We're placed here. It's an extension of the city of Reykjavik to a harbor area. So it's also a regeneration project. I bought these two plans because there's again an interesting side of this, which is about that we have like 4 formal venues. We have like the big auditorium, 1,850 seats. We have 2 flat floors, which is black box theaters, and this is happening at first floor. And then at ground floor we have a small theater with a kind of a stepping auditorium-like organization. And then the rest of all of this is kind of public accessible areas. And they are not programmed in reality, but they are the areas where you can invite people in without tickets. Because this idea that culture becomes so expensive that you can only paying €100 or $125, even more if I correct it, maybe it's $150 to get in for an evening. That is a lot of money, and many people could have good use of these places without that kind of fee. This is the section model we did in the competition. So it's a little bit not correct as such, but it talks about the ambition of having these very vertical spaces around the concert hall that can be inhabited and conquered by people. Iceland, that's an extreme place. It's not just the economy, it's also the daylight. It's much, much worse than Denmark. This is representing a 2-hour slot in a July day. And you can see that the sun never sets. So you can find families 3 o'clock in the morning walking with their kids at the main street in Reykjavik. And it is really strange. And if you want to sleep, you have total blinds you put in on the room. But it also somehow gave us an opportunity to work with this extreme situation design-wise. You can ask yourself what kind of building would kind of resonate in such a climate or in such an extreme situation, because it also goes the other way. In the winter time, the sun comes up like 10:30 and it goes away like 1 o'clock. It means that you have a relatively short day, at least if you want to be up that day. We worked with an artist, Ryerson. He's the artist for the waterfalls under the Brooklyn Bridge and a lot of other places. Really a fantastic artist. And together with him, we found these, he found these rocks formations, which is a very Icelandic, typical Icelandic stone, basalt, which is totally black, and have this kind of shape. That was transformed into these kind of bricks, as we call them. And the reason why we did this was to somehow work with the climate or the sun and the heavy or the extreme daylight in one hand, but also doing something that could be really Icelandic. So you, as a person in your own nation, you felt that this project could only be built in my country. And then we transformed that from smaller models to bigger models to mock-up in China, where we did the facade eventually. Inside, we created these very big and lush spaces where the daylight kind of floats in. You see the different colors on the glass. We work with clear glass, colored glass, and mirrors. It's a kind of transparent mirror, but it is kind of mirroring. And that facade also changes totally with the sky. The reflections of the sky and the colors goes directly into the glass as such. And in a way, the building, let's say, almost like breathes like a human being over the day and over the year. This is a kind of a front facade shot on the facade, and you see it creates this very I think intriguing pattern, but also interesting because it changes because of the sun angle hitting that. We worked a lot with the opening, as I talked about before, the invitation to the city. So at ground floor level, we have a lot of doors opening up, and at daytime, you can just kind of come in. This building is used for concerts, theaters, computer festivals, car exhibitions, folk dance, all kinds of things. It's a really multifunctional place, and it means that a lot of user groups in Iceland can go to it and feel that this is their building, even though a lot of other ones also have the same feeling. We have a very cold, usually quite cold summer, like 7 degrees in a July day, 7 degrees Celsius. And that is, you cannot wear shorts, that's so cool. So a lot of activities happening normally outside can be drawn in and happens inside. And this is one of these things just happening in this area here. And you see how much the pattern, the let's say very kind of dominant design approach kind of colors the spaces. The ambition was to make a space that would be, let's say, not confused with any commercial space, workspace, home, or anything like that. It should be something that had a kind of a national attraction as such. Looking at the venues, coming back to them, we have the flat floors, the black boxes. Of course, there's all kind of techniques, you can do whatever. And then we have the smaller auditorium with the sloping seating. And then this one, the big box, it's acoustically made. It's an acoustic concept from Arkitekter in New York. It's a shoebox system. I don't know if you know the difference, but the shoebox system is that the acoustic walls of the concert hall is the shoebox outside. Inside you can furnish it with all kind of stuff, but the sound is kind of traveling all the way out to be held in the shoebox. Like Arab Acoustic from London, they work with a horseshoe-shaped auditorium, like in northern Italy. And this is completely different. This is how we did the opera in Copenhagen. That's a different concept. But the shoebox system is very robust to all kind of functions. It's maybe not the total optimum if you want classical music, but you cannot make a place like this totally second to none. That would not do the job, because you need a much more flexible institution than you usually would have, because you cannot have an opera every evening in Iceland. There's simply not people enough for it. And then from Instagram again, I took these pictures with me, and just look at the yoga classes. That must be strange to have that if somebody is trying to get a car in there for an exhibition 2 hours later. I can imagine something. But the idea that people kind of have taken the building into their everyday life and see it as their building a lot. This is a picture from 10 o'clock in the evening on a July day. And it's really strange. And it talks about this strange situation that you can have such a situation in the summertime, and in the winter this would not even be 10 o'clock in the morning with this kind of light. And this is the restaurant area, and it seems a little empty, but it's very early. You can see we have the ladder in that area. We're not really totally there, but I think the picture in many ways shows what it's about. Then coming to like this time, September, you start having these kind of long afternoons, and again the building totally changed its appearance on the outside, but also on the inside. And then in winter time, it becomes a beacon. It reverses totally. It becomes let's say a destination in Reykjavik you want to go to, because it's almost dark 20 hours a day. And we last year in 2013 received the Mies van der Rohe Prize for the building. Of course, we are immensely proud of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. It's a difficult building to come after, but I'll try. The buildings we do is a little bit different, but the connection between me and Henning Larsen is that I had my formative years in Henning Larsen's office working with Louis and other people that actually came out of the School of Aarhus. We were together in the first 5 years in Aarhus, and afterwards we worked with Henning Larsen. So the office is very important to me. I formed my own office 15 years ago, and we are 30 people, which is not as big as Henning Larsen. And also we do smaller buildings, you could say, doing mostly culture and educational buildings, but also some commercial and workspaces. Right now we're doing the global headquarters of IKEA. I guess most people know IKEA. And they're doing a new global, we're not supposed to call it a headquarter because the headquarter will always be an input. But it's in Malmö. It's a global meeting center and workspace. And then, so what I'm going to show you here is mainly four different buildings, some educational and some cultural buildings, mainly in Denmark and Sweden. This is a very small project. It's in a suburban setting right outside Copenhagen, and it's a small neighborhood center. It's a tiny cultural house, and it's in this kind of sort of social democratic setting. As you can see, there's lots of detached houses, but also social housing around. And in these areas, they have a tradition of having these small cultural houses. This was a competition, and the development was quite new, so there was no end users there. And part of it was to rethink the program for a traditional cultural house, which was mainly made as a kind of space you could rent for parties on a Saturday evening, and by doing that, you would actually privatize these small cultural houses that is supposed to be for everybody and is supposed to create activity in the area. So the site we were giving in the competition, as you can see, is quite small, and the idea was to create activity, as much activity during the day as possible in this small house, and by stacking all the activities and connecting them with the staircase in the back. You could use every space separately, but you could also combine them. As you can see here, all the activities that we imagine could be going on here, from skateboarding to making dinner for your friends and bringing it back home in the kitchen, in the industrial kitchen in the bottom. You can also open that up as a kiosk, and you could be outside in the summertime. We have a small auditorium, and we have a small multi-purpose space, and we have a basketball field on top, which is also an outdoor bar mainly in the summertime. Of course, energy is a very important issue in Denmark, and this was 2008, and at that time the requirements was strict, but not as strict as now. But we wanted to reduce the consumption of energy with 30%, but actually we halved the energy consumptions down to 40 kilowatts square meter, which is at that time quite low. And we did that by using all different kinds of technology, but also by being sort of low-tech, having natural ventilation, of course, controlled by sensors and so forth, geothermal heating, and etc. etc. So this is how it looks like. It shows the stacking of the activities. It's aluminium cladding, which is also passive solar screening from the big windows. Some is perforated and some is not. As you can see here, you have the staircase leading to the first floor, to the auditorium, that you can combine with the multi-purpose space, or you can detach that. You could also enter on the ground floor and with a small staircase or an elevator getting up through the houses. And this is the daytime view. As you can see, it's very difficult actually to see that, but the master plan is a forest of acacia trees, pseudo-acacia trees, which is kind of light-leaved, It's very hard to see, but you have all these trees around here. But the idea is that this neighborhood center or cultural center will always show in this suburban setting, which is 2.5 stories high, or maybe even lower. So this will always be higher than the trees, and you can see from a far distance if something is going on in the neighborhood. We have this climbing wall here that is very much in use actually with instructors, and we have this skateboard ramp here, and we have the basketball field. And you have, of course, the indoor activities. And this is the light. As you can see, it's quite easy to see if something is going on, either on the roof or inside the house. Here's the auditorium, which is basically just a staircase or small staircase, and here you have activities like small theater settings or small lectures and so forth. The use of yellow flooring is something that we do quite a lot to reflect the daylight, which is, as I guess here also in the winter time, is very dark and grey. And by using these kind of reflectants or surfaces that reflect the light in a kind of warm way, you have this feeling of sunshine. Of course, it's quite bright, but this is only a house that you will sort of enter once in a while. So, and here's the multi-purpose space. This is the winter time, as you can see, with snow outside and really sort of grey daylight. And of course, detailing with the aluminum, which is reused aluminum mainly to keep the house as sustainable as possible. And here you see some of the solar screening. I think it's quite difficult to see, but this is perforated, so you get the daylight in, but still not the entire heating, overheating. And here's the basketball field at night time, looking over suburbia. The next project is also in Copenhagen. If some of you, I'm sure you know everything about where Denmark and Sweden and Norway and so forth, but this is Denmark, this is Copenhagen, and here you have Sweden. So Copenhagen is right across the sound, and actually a lot of the activity going on now is happening in this area around Sweden or Malmö and Copenhagen. And then you have Aarhus, which is the second largest city in Denmark, and Germany is down here. The next project is Munkegårdsskolen, which is a project originally a project by Arne Jacobsen. I don't know if some of you might know him. In Denmark, he's an icon of modernist architecture, and Munkegårdsskolen, I think, is one of his finest works. It opened in '56, and it was very progressive at the time. Until that time, all the schools were kind of stacked plans, and you had the classrooms, and you had the circulation, and you had the schoolyard, and you had the special activities. But this was the first school in Denmark that was actually on the ground level, and it was resembling somehow home, small houses. All the classrooms were like a small house, and you had this small courtyard in front of it that you would share with your neighboring classroom. So the scaling of the school is very sensitive, you could say, to the scale of the children, and it's very sort of homey. Besides that, Arne Jacobsen also designed all the furniture, and he designed the doorknobs, and so it's a kind of Gesamtkunstwerk. And unfortunately, I don't think they understood what was there. So mainly the furniture is gone, and we had to redo a lot of the fittings and when we did the restoration, we had to bring a lot of things back to the 56. But the main reason why we got this This is the full school. It's, as you can see, you have these classrooms with the small courtyards in front. Actually, you have a twin classroom and a twin courtyard, and it's kind of very structural, and you can continue this structure forever if you want to. And it's all connected with these hallways only going in one direction. You have the specialized classrooms here in the back, and you have the central hall, which was at that time used mainly for gatherings. In the morning, there was a tradition, I don't know if you have this kind of tradition here, but you would meet in the morning and sing a song, and then you would go out for your classes, but you don't do that anymore. So this full space was kind of empty, and in a way it was kind of an empty heart in the school. No activities, and well, so the reason why we got this assignment was that in this municipality they were changing all the schools to facilitate new ways of learning, which is of course much more project oriented, and also in need of a lot of different space types. You need to be able to go out with a group to work together, or to work individually, or to work with larger groups. And in that sense, the school was kind of old-fashioned because you only had these classrooms and the specialized rooms. So the municipality worked with two architectural firms to try to restructure the school, actually by covering some of the courtyards and also by changing the whole structure, which was kind of a tough way of working with this beautiful piece. And since it was, fortunately, it was federally listed, the cultural minister in the end vetoed this refurbishment or reconstruction of the building, and since the client wanted to use it, they asked us if we would like to try to in some ways look at the school and by doing less still facilitate the new ways of learning. And I think we were very lucky to get this assignment, of course, and also we are very intrigued by getting these kind of assignments. We like challenges. Actually, that's what makes us happy, you could say. So the initial work was mainly to try to reprogram the school, to see if we could find a way to use the same structure, but in a new way. So what we initially did was to use the after-school facilities, which is part of a Danish law, is that you have to provide for after-school facilities for the children after school until your parents are able to pick you up. And by reusing the same square meters inside the school and in the after-school facilities, we could somehow get more square meters altogether. And by opening up between the two classrooms with the sliding door, making these kind of small changes, we could still use the same structure, but in a different way. And then we moved the library, the mediathek down into the assembly hall to recreate the heart of the school. And then we suggested that you could actually make a supplement to the very strict structure of Arne Jacobsen, but doing it underground. So the idea is that you have two parallel walls that that makes a supplement. You don't change everything; you only change something, and by doing that, you can add new spaces to the old structure. So this is the old schoolyard in '56, and by defining the asphalt or the ground as the limit for the listed building, we worked with this kind of overground and underground structures. And if you are on the other side of the listed line, we worked with the Arne Jacobsen proportioning and also the detailing. So this is half a courtyard in the proportion and also in scale. And then you can twist that geometry when you go underground, because when you're underground, you're not in listed grounds anymore. So by doing that, we could create this underground space, which is much more fluent, has a totally different scale than the Arne Jacobsen structure. And by adding these specialized facilities, we could also save the old building from having ventilation ducts and so forth, which is really not possible in this kind of really defined structure that he did, and also the detailing. So mainly the underground plan looks like this. You have this very large fluent space around these light courtyards. You have these ventilation spaces that requires ventilation in this side, and you have glass walls that can open up to the big space, so you can have this kind of large laboratory or project space that you can use together with these specialized spaces. And here you have the sort of famous Arne Jacobsen hallway, which is a classic architectural move, you could say, where you really have suspense and you open up the spaces in this rhythm, and then we connected that to the new extension underground, and by doing that we could also connect the school this way. Of course, it's difficult to build underground and still have daylight. You heard Louis talk about daylight, a very important thing. And the parents were very nervous about this idea of putting their children underground. So the main strategy that we had was that the underground building should be much brighter than the building above ground, and we should have this feeling of going up into the sky when we move down. So studying of light in models in light laboratory and so forth, and of course working a lot with the reflecting surfaces to ensure that we had enough daylight down here. This is the construction side, of course, difficult and very sort of sensitive not to destroy the existing building. This is the old assembly hall where we're putting this furniture to facilitate the new library, but also to keep and to make it possible to reverse this, to take it down and keep the Arne Jacobsen space. And just, if anybody thinks that the colors are very sort of bright, it's not our colors, this is the old color scheme that we reused all over the school, and we added a few colors as well. So this is the original carpet that we redid, and this is the original chairs that he did for the school that we had to paint because they were in so bad condition. They're one of the few left. Did that in 4 different sizes. This, of course, one thing is to facilitate the library and to be able to make intimate spaces inside the library, but also to keep the feeling of the double height facade. So what we did was making these Harry Potter shelves. You could say that the children could change the space and you could open up totally towards the facade, and having these kind of daylight spaces underneath, so you're not afraid or you don't want to go into this kind of dark space. So this is kind of the line between the existing building and the new building. We put in toilets on the inside. In the 56, you would never go, you would never have toilets inside, but that was a demand. So we had to dig out underneath the old building, and somehow this is also an old Arne Jacobsen column, and somehow paying a homage to the old guy. We used an old sketch for wallpaper and resized it and used it on the floor and on the walls inside the toilets to make them nice. Also, it's co-ed, and you can always get away in 2 directions, so you don't get caught. You know, yeah, we all been in this sink. You know. So, and this is how it looks like from the schoolyard. the underground building. The restoration is, of course, a whole other story of the existing school, bringing back the old colors and so forth. And when you move down, as you can see, you have these classical proportions here, and you move down and you get a different space when you come down. And inside, we used white and the white concrete, of course, to reflect as much light as possible. And it is very bright down there. This is the main construction is steel and secondary construction for the windows. And looking up towards the existing school. All the hallways are connected with these small auditoriums or stairs, so you can have informal lectures with the children, and you can then work in the bigger space. Or you could work inside these facilities like physical chemistry. There's also a physical education space. There's a biology space, and there's a school kitchen in these smaller spaces here. But you can open them up and you can work like this guy sitting outside studying, while mainly the lecturing and well, I don't know the word in English. So, and you use these courtyards for experiments, especially the physics class used this a lot for different experiments. A school kitchen for everybody to use in the breaks, and in the afternoon you can come down here and you can also use it in project work. If you have about chili, you can make empanadas here or whatever. So this is the idea of this big space is more like a one big project space, one big laboratory for the whole school to use. Another project that we did, actually it's been a long time on its way. We did the first sketches in 2004, but this is we think it's the first newly built children's culture house. It's not an institution in a traditional way. It's a place for children to come and do culture. You have professional teachers, dancers, artists, and so forth. And children come here of their own will to do different projects. The foundation, the Copenhagen municipality paid part of this house, but also the rest was funded by private foundations. And the site that we were given was really, really tiny. It was in between these two houses, this house and here. And one is 2.5 stories high, and one is 6 stories high. So we had this kind of scale problem in between these two houses, and the rest of this area is a kind of cultural area with a cinema, with a neighborhood center, and so forth. And it's in a very rundown neighborhood, so it's part of a neighborhood lift. So this is a site actually under construction. So it was, the border of the site was here, and here you have the rest of the cultural buildings. Here's the cinema. So the idea was to get as much square meters out of the site as possible, but still taking care of the neighbors. So by connecting the two very different scales from this 6.5 story building and this 2.5 story building, and pushing down the middle of the shape to ensure that we could get sunlight and daylight into the neighboring buildings. We actually created this kind of envelope that could contain this children's culture house. It's a very complicated house, spatially, and the idea is that you can always orientate yourself when you get into this low part, and you're able to actually see all the activities going on, and by doing that you can make a choice, and you can choose to go to either side. One of the sides here is mainly workshops where you do dance or you do art, and they're enclosed acoustically, but you can always look from one space to the other, so you can see from this space up here and all the way down to the entrance floor. The other part of the building is more open. It's for the performing arts, and you have a performance space down here that's dug down half a story. You have an open cafe here, and you have smaller spaces for the children further up here. And this is kind of the inside. Everything is connected on one side here, called the mountain, by a big staircase, which is also a gallery where you can exhibit your work. And you have a multi-purpose workshop here. You have and two smaller workshops here where you can either do dance or you can do art. It's all enveloped by the same skin. So you have these deep windows, which is kind of spaces in between, inside and outside, towards the sky, of course, but also towards the outside world. This is the render. The idea is that these deep windows can be inhabited, that the children can change the inside of it, and they can actually inhabit that for a while. So you can sort of privatize the skin in between inside and outside, but only for a while, of course. Yeah, this is the connection. As you can see, it's very sort of, it's very, there's a lot of buildings around it, so it's, yeah, it's difficult to kind of overview the whole building. And here's the roof line going down into to the workshops. And the kind of scale connection between the existing building and the country house. And here you have the deeper windows, and you can see this is actually the children's work. You can take the lighting out and you can change it and put it in again. And this is the called the beach. It's kind of the entrance space, which is changing all the time. You can kind of shape it. If you have a project here, you have sort of a project for the whole house, you would kind of shape this space. So this is changing all the time. But mainly it's kind of an empty space that you can fill up with different stuff. You have the multi-purpose workshop here. You have the staircase up to the other workshops on this side. Multi-purpose workshop. Yeah, and then you can open it up or close it with a sliding wall. And of course, you always have the connection all the way up to the other floors. And here the staircase, which is also a climbing wall when you don't exhibit works. All these are fittings that you can use for exhibit. This is the kind of small, children come here from the age of 1 till 18, so you have to facilitate a lot of different age groups. And this is kind of the smallest you can see working with them. We were lucky enough to do most of the furniture. This is kind of a drum furniture. You could use it to drum. You can sit in it, and you can drum, and you can make these kind of rhythmical things with this. Looking down into this theatre space and up to the cafe here. Activity. And if you want to watch from the cafe to the theatre, you can do that. And all these kind of smaller spaces, we worked with a group of children making the program. And one of the things they said was, we want to have space where we can be alone with our best friend or be alone together. So making these kind of smaller spaces within the house that you could withdraw to was an important part. like this one. Just kind of tiny spaces, leftover spaces, you can see. You can write on the walls in the toilet. And another smaller spaces underneath the stair. Yeah, dancing. All spaces are used for different things, so you need to make furniture that can change. So this is a mirror cupboard, but you can also could also change it to be a normal cupboard. So you can always change the spaces, so you're sure you can use the space twice. Small library underneath the stair. Do you have time for one more project? Yeah. Okay. This is a sports and culture facility also in a quite rundown neighborhood. It's also part of a neighborhood lift in Copenhagen, and this was the site we were given for the competition, and there was a quite loose program saying we want to have a space where you can do sports, and handball, which is not the same here as in Denmark, is a very important sport, and so you need to have a handball field. You need to have, of course, changing facilities and so forth, but otherwise the program is quite open. And as you can see, this is in Copenhagen. The Copenhagen block is kind of a type you see all over, and this is a strange thing because suddenly the Copenhagen block is opened up, and you see this kind of section, which is very sort of distinct. And so we thought that this was celebrating somehow the housing of the block, or the housing in the area, very sort of tight, very dense, not much daylight, but it was difficult to, we were allowed to actually build along this wall, but it was kind of difficult to make things merge just by doing a building on these gables. So what we did was to define the field, of course, and the program. This is the handball field, and the gables that we characterized as being very special. And what we did was to look at the light conditions in these backyards. And this is west, so to ensure that the western sun could get into the backyards, we connected like this, and then we merged the program and the gables. And by doing that, we got this three-dimensional building site. We could say you have this kind of big covered field, big covered space that you can use for many different things. So it's mainly kind of a covered outdoor space. This is the field underneath. The feeling of having this outdoor space we enhanced by folding up this the grass, and by doing that you had connections to these surfaces here and to the big field here, and you could provide for enclosed facilities underneath. Polycarbonate is a nice and very inexpensive material, but also it's transparent. And we found it was very important that you had this. If you had a covered field, you also have daylight. And nobody wants to go into these sports halls that have artificial lighting, especially in the summertime. We want to enjoy the long evenings. So this is another project, but the qualities of polycarbonate is very obvious. With the transparency and the shadows, and you can see what's going on behind it, and you can see the light inside it. So this is the primary construction in steel, which is minimized, as you can see, and the secondary construction in plywood, which is also quite inexpensive. And here you have the cupboard. We had a lot of fights with the sports end users because they were used to daylight being a bad thing in a sports hall because you could get blinded. But of course, since you don't have any contrast, you don't get blinded. So it's actually possible to do sports in daylight as you could do outside. But also inside you can do that. And this is how it shows in the evening. So you have this kind of attractor, you could say, in the street. It's open from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock in the evening, and at the winter time it's quite important that you have this kind of attraction. The green is of course the reflection of the floor, and this is the daytime from the other side, so it reflects the sky in a very sort of varied way. The space is ventilated naturally, but these windows open automatically. When you get too much heat up here, you take in the air down here, and you take it out here. The geometry is very, very good for natural ventilation, of course, and during the night time. And also, as you can see, you get the direct daylighting, which is also important, so you don't have this diffuse light everywhere, but you also have direction on the light once in a while. And the relationship to the existing topology. And the backyards, where you actually see that you haven't enclosed the backyards the same way as we could have done. Inside you have the open field. This is not a competitive sports hall, it's more like a gathering place. And it was important to us that you can connect the two streets through this hall. And this is more like a gathering place, and you could also leave your stuff there if you don't want to. If you want to change clothes, and you can do sports. The idea is also that you can, when you get more money, you can build actually in the 3 dimensions. So going up into these towers, you can put in decks, and you can enlarge the amount of square meters. And we already have a project doing that. And as you can see, you don't get blinded by the contrast because there is not much contrast between outside and inside. Yeah. That was a mistake. Very fast, small project in Sweden, a kindergarten on the beach, right across the sound from Copenhagen. Of course, the site is listed, and it was a very difficult site to work with because the neighbors were really angry that something had to be built there. But there was a building site, so the client wanted to have this free school connected to the existing school. And the idea is that we try to understate the building as being a building, and we work with these small fishing huts that you have all around the small city. And the landscape. So by merging the two, we have this kind of understated landscape on the beach. And this is how it looks like. In the evening, you have these small fishing huts or a typology like that, and this is the kind of landscape. And it's clad in Opinia, which is a kind of a sustainable tree that is very small, but so you can only use it in small sticks, but it's very extremely hard, and it's very robust towards the water, so it has the same abilities as teak, but it's grown in Europe. So. The playing field here is kind of dug down, and we put the landscape up here, so you can't see it from the outside. It's more like a floating landscape, and you have and this is merged into that. Nice view from the roof. The intention was that the public could actually use the roof, but the client thought it was too risky, but actually now I see all the skaters up there without any fences, so maybe this is more dangerous than actually having a public route across the roof. But this is the inside. The idea is that the fishing huts are defined by these open but still acoustically closed shelves, and you have these. Every group is defined by this little house, and all the spaces in between is common space for everybody. And of course, you can somehow bring to order all these different things that you need in a preschool, so it's not so chaotic. The wardrobe can also be used as other things, you could say. And this is the group room with a wonderful view, and of course lots and lots of daylight. Thank you.
I'm sure you would entertain a few questions.
Sure.
Questions from the audience?
No questions?
There you go. Oh, okay.
Cut down. Well, I think we do focus, in general, I think part of the tradition in Denmark is that you focus as much as the building that you're actually doing, you focus just as much on the space in between, and the public space, right? So the idea is to try to give back what you've taken. So I think even if you see like the 40s and the 50s, very sort of subtle housing projects from especially Denmark, you would also see a great care in the public space in between the buildings. So I think that's kind of taking that a little bit further, but it's mainly about the interest of trying to give back to the public.
There's a question over there.
In Canada, it seems when you're designing schools or hospitals or all kinds of public buildings, there's a lot of restrictions and there's almost like a template approach to how you design. But I see in Scandinavia there's quite a variety of difference in the approach to how you design each individual school or each individual hospital. Is there something written into, for example, the building code, or would you say there's more of a cultural value on approaching design as per the context instead of as like a whole template to take all across the country?
Again, I think. Yeah, again, I think there's a methodology. There's a method that is part of the DNA of the education system. I think the architectural education system that insists on public works like schools and hospitals and so forth as being that you have to innovate, that you have to somehow push the border a little bit. And I think the discussions in the architectural magazines and so forth is also very much about the program, as much as the formal approach. So I think it's part of the DNA somehow of the education. but because the building code is not different than yours. It's just a different approach to program. Yeah.
How are the schools and kindergarten projects that you showed us funded?
Yeah, this is the Swedes are very rich. No, it's this is a Swedish project, and I think they have a little more funding than we do in Copenhagen. But it's always funded by the municipalities. So it's publicly funded. There is a regulation saying that you need to have public care for children that are more than 1 year old. So if the municipality doesn't have enough institutions, they have to build.
Is there no other questions?
I can't see. Are there no other questions? Do you have a question, Masha?
I have more of a comment. I really appreciate both presentations, and both of you show a very joyful work. Different scale, with the use of light and the use of colors and tectonics and glass, amazing use of glass in both cases. So you feel you're coming from the same upbringing, I guess. But I'm a little bit surprised that neither of you addressed an issue of winter white. Both of your presentations are based on light, and both are showing 95% summer situation, which is short and easy to deal with. And my question is whether either of the projects address an issue of reflective white surface of the snow, and if it does, did you come up with any interesting suggestions, like light surface through, like, I don't know, but something that would.
Jeg skal nok, jeg kan svare først, så kan du svare efter. Yeah, that is an interesting question. I have one house with snow outside, but in Denmark we're not sure of snow, so I think we don't count on it. So usually what we count on is having a really, really dull winter where we get up 8 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, we go to work, we come back home 5 o'clock, it's dark, and everything in between is kind of gray. So having snow is great, it's wonderful, you get reflections, but it's not something we can count on. So I think maybe that's why we don't count it in as a possibility. It's mainly something beautiful.
So you stay up during the white nights and then you hibernate during the winter.
Yes. Well, you want to have the.
I think you're raising a valid point here, and Dorte's answering good by saying that we don't sure about the snow. But I think these very grey days, which is the most known one, is kind of also depressing. We have worked in our office with studies around like mental health and daylight. And it seems that if you want to, and this is done with hospitals, but we are not experts in that field, but you need half an hour a day outside with at least 2,500 lux to stay happy. And happy not means happy, it means like stay not depressed. And in Scandinavia at the moment, many people go to work before it gets daylit in the winter, and they leave work before they go home. So after the sun kind of set. So it means that we have a lot of winter depression in the area. And what we try to do architecturally, and I think it goes from much more than just Dorte's practice and my practice, is that architects in general trying to somehow mitigate, do something with that fact that we need to get most daylight into the buildings. And sometimes you can do it very playful. Dorte's doing that in a fantastic way. And in many projects it becomes just a matter of ensuring enough daylight, let's say 6 meters from the facade. When we show these pictures which at most was from summertime, I fully agree. It's also because I think, the feel of summer is where things are happening in a way. In the winter we sit and concentrate and work, and we don't take too much pictures of it because it also looks quite dull. But the studies of the well-being have kind of moved a lot in our assumptions, also with healing architecture for hospitals. We are right now doing a quite big extension of a hospital where we put all the rooms where people sleep. And if you sleep in a hospital today in Denmark, you are really sick. You're like almost dying because otherwise you're sent home. So, but up there, on the top floors, we have a kind of a ring of rooms, and we know also by the research that the daylight factor, but also the view to nature, have a healing effect.
Yeah, that's actually a study. That was your question. That's a study that has been done. A lot of work trying to rethink hospitals as being where the buildings are healing. They call it the healing hospital. And we could discuss when you see that there's getting 5 really, really huge hospitals built right now in Denmark based on this program. And maybe it's not quite as ambitious as it should have been, but the idea was to reprogram the whole idea of hospitals to make the buildings help heal people. Sounds a little jumbo,
but it was very much to
but it's very nice actually.
And just to maybe finalize this, it was to kind of separate the machine, the rooms with the surgery, all the technique from the patients in a way. So instead of you feel that you are put into the engine room of a car, something arms, you feel that it's kind of it's what you see, how you feel that is most important, and then the technique kind of will be supplied. So in many of the projects, and also in our project, we have the surgery and all the technique in the bottom where you don't need daylight. You don't want daylight. You want to have concentrated light on the patient when you cut them up, whatever we do. And then on top we have the patients.
Hospital was actually an easier task than a school. Because you're really more concerned with the perception of a child, of a healthy child, rather than in a hospital facility, right?
In the last 10 years, there's been very much focus in that there's too much heat gain if you have a big windows. But new studies shows that if you don't have that with the computers giving less and less heat from light systems, make less and less energy coming out in the space. Then now we're starting to opening up for much more glass to get heat into a kind of passive heating in the houses from the sun, which also supports that area.
But that's another discussion about the daylight and the sustainability. Is that the big dilemma right now is that you have to design houses that only have 40% facade, which is open, because otherwise you can't keep the energy calculation right. So I think it's a big dilemma, right? Anyway, thank you very much.